Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the graphs for perfectly competitive factor markets. We're going to take a look at what MRP and MFC look like and figure out how many workers will a firm hire. Let's get started. Okay, so this first section is really just telling you, draw the factor market and firm in perfect competition and equilibrium. So this is going to be our base graph, and then we're actually going to redraw it a couple of times underneath just to kind of get practice with redrawing it, but then we're also going to show what it looks like when things change out of it. So without further ado, we're going to draw a labor market, and that's mostly because labor markets are pretty common, but we also know that we kind of understand them in a little here. We know that we're going to need W up here on the y-axis, and we're going to put QL down here just to remind ourselves that we're talking about labor instead of output products. Now, I also labeled it market and firm. Those are kind of more optional as well, but that just helps you remember which one's the market and which one's the firm. We will have a downward sloping demand for labor in the market and an upward sloping supply of labor in the market. Sometimes kids like to put a little L next to those as well. That's fine if you want to. And we are going to take our dashed line, establish an equilibrium wage that's occurring in the market, and then it is also what this firm is going to pay. So this firm is what we call a wage taker, which means that they just have to pay what the prevailing wage in the market is, and that wage in the market is really set by the interaction of supply and demand. Now, this wage that they pay is equivalent to the marginal factor cost, which is the cost of hiring each worker, right? So if this was like $20 an hour, we would say that each time they hire a unit of labor, an hour of labor, that it costs them $20. So that's why it's all kind of a horizontal line here. This is also the firm's kind of the supply curve of labor to the firm. So this is the supply of labor to the firm. It's a little bit weird to think about that, but that is what it is. It's just like Mr. DARP, right? When we talked about the marginal revenue and the demand curve for the firm, this is the supply of labor curve for the firm. The demand curve for firm is a marginal revenue product, and it looks like this, MRP. It's going to have actually this little tail hook at the top and then come all the way down. Now, the reasoning for why this is, it can be helpful to write up here, MRP equals the price times the marginal product. And so for the first few workers or hours that we have, for the first couple, right, we actually expect the marginal product of those first few to rise because of specialization. And so that actually explains why the beginning is upward sloping, and the diminishing marginal returns, the fact that the marginal product is going to decrease, is actually explaining why the MRP is getting smaller for every single worker that we hire. It has nothing to do with the fact that like this worker that we hire down here is not very productive. It's just the diminishing marginal returns has kind of eroded their ability to produce units. This firm will produce here, QF. We didn't include a Q star in the market. And this does say WF, so I should probably just put WF over here instead of W star. But this is a base graph. There is no ATC or anything crazy looking like that. This is all it is to draw a perfectly competitive factor market and a firm. So let's redraw that graph, and we're going to actually redraw that here 3 more times. And so I am going to speed this video up, and I'll see you in just a moment. Okay, so now that we've kind of redrawn our graphs here a few more times, we're just going to show some shifts out of this long run equilibrium, kind of show what would happen with short run changes or long run changes to productivity or to demand. Because it can be useful to remember that really the demand curve here is the marginal revenue product, right? And that's almost always what we're going to use to actually show the changes in these markets. We can show alternate changes, right? Like productivity, and we'll actually take a look at that in just a second. But productivity is going to be based, or sorry, I don't know why I said that. Productivity is going to be based on the demand curve as well. It's going to affect the marginal product and then the price of the product as well. So almost always when we're changing things, we're going to be changing the demand curve. Let's take a look here for an increase in demand for the outputs. Well, if there's higher priced output, then that's going to make the MRP increase, right? Up here, we can just see price times marginal product, which would mean it's going to go up. So the demand in the overall market for workers would increase. So that's going to shift to the right. And this does get a little bit tricky because that higher demand in the marketplace and that higher marginal revenue product that's occurring here is not going to just lead to a new intercept right over here. It's actually going to cause there to be a higher wage in the market, and our marginal factor cost will increase. So it's a little bit cattywampus than compared to what we've been doing before, but it is helpful if you just put a dot and you say, okay, that's where we started and where we finished, right? And where did we finish? Well, we started, where did we finish? It's kind of a parallel direction, right? When you're kind of thinking about it, because there's going to be, first off, more demand in the market because there's more demand for the outputs. So there's going to be firms that are saying, I want to hire this type of worker who can produce AI or whatever, right? And then within each individual firm, each worker becomes more valuable. So the MRP is actually rising of each worker. I should finish this picture here and put Q sub 1. But at the very same time that happens, the higher demand in the market causes higher wages. That makes this firm's wages be higher as well. So the firm's going to pay a higher wage and hire more workers as a result of the greater demand. That really shouldn't be terribly earth-shattering, right? But it is a little bit weird to notice that the higher demand here will lead to a higher marginal factor cost for this firm. It's a little bit strange to think of it that way, but that is really what's going on here, right? The factor cost is higher, and so this firm is going to hire more workers, but they're going to pay them more. Let's take a look at what problem 3 would be, a decrease in the productivity of outputs. Now, remember, MRP is the price of the good times the marginal product. And in this one, the marginal product is decreasing. So it's saying that each worker is becoming less and less productive. So that means each worker is less valuable, right? Each worker is less valuable. And so that's going to lead to a smaller value in the market and a lower wage. Now, over here, W1, we do need to show that the demand is shifting down, and we're going to show that the marginal revenue product, the marginal factor cost is also shifting down. So there's kind of two things going on at the same time, and I know that can be really complicated for some folks, but what you always should really see is the dots are going to move pretty much in the same direction, right? When you see these kind of going down demand, it's going to cause the marginal factor cost to go down because the firm's a wage taker, and so the MFC is now at this lower value, and you can also see that we are hiring fewer workers in the firm, and that's because there's smaller demand for those workers. Okay. Now let's take a look at what a minimum wage would look like in this type of market. A minimum wage, as we know, would be a price floor. So W min, I'm just going to label it as, and that's going to also apply to this firm. And we know that the firm is going to hire fewer workers as a consequence. Now we do know there's going to be a surplus of labor, which we call unemployment, right? So these are unemployed workers, is the number here, unemployed. But from the firm's perspective, they don't really care about those unemployed. I mean, they care about them, but it's not really something they're dealing with. For them, the marginal factor cost just went up, and so they hire fewer workers. So what we would expect in a perfectly competitive factor market with a minimum wage that is binding above the minimum here is that the firms will hire fewer workers overall in the market, and the firms will hire fewer workers in the firm market, or in the firm graph, I should say, but they will obviously pay them a higher wage, W min. So hopefully this helped you understanding the basics of perfectly competitive factor markets. I'll see you next time.